Right, now we'll move over to our third team. This is Team Adapt to Survive, made up of 3 Chevening alumni from Anguilla. The presenter today will be Carencia Rouse, and answering questions in the chat will be Sharmer Fleming. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Team Adapt to Survive.
Hello everyone, I'm just going to jump right in. Can you move to the next slide, please? Anguilla is a small island coastal developing state that is exposed to natural disasters, coastal erosion, and loss of biodiversity. One of our biggest challenges is trying to mitigate these risks while we utilize our natural resources to promote sustainable development. What makes this even more difficult is the fact that we have no funds dedicated to climate change. We've been relying on project funding on a very small scale to help us to achieve our climate change objectives. Despite our efforts, external shocks continue to set us back, including the collapse of 2 of our indigenous banks, the global recession, which has caused a spike in the cost of the imports that we rely on, and COVID-19, where funding that could have been allocated to climate change has been redirected to other priority areas, including health and education. In essence, our climate change vulnerability continues to expand while our capacity to invest in adaptation is declining. Next slide, please. To address this challenge, we propose the establishment of a climate change trust fund for Anguilla to implement adaptation projects. Key sources of financing will include a percentage of payments from foreign investors seeking to buy land in Anguilla or seeking to develop in Anguilla, fees from businesses with high environmental footprints, including petroleum companies and boating companies, a percentage of the environmental taxes charged by tourist accommodations, including resorts, hotels, and villas, and fines associated with environmental degradation activities, including pollution, sand mining, and major forms of deforestation. Philanthropists and other donors that have a special interest in climate change resilience will have the opportunity to contribute to our fund. We have identified this as a very important source of financing, and as such, we will ensure that there are transparency mechanisms in place to prevent contributions from going into the government's consolidated fund. Next slide, please. We anticipate that our climate trust fund for Anguilla will enable us to adapt to existing and future climate change impacts, as well as allow us to set our own climate change priorities. We envision that it will promote a bottom-up approach to climate change decision-making, where vulnerable communities can design projects that meet their own needs while improving their understanding of and commitment to climate change, as well as fostering collaborative climate action. We also seek to invest in climate change technology, which will improve the implementation of early warning systems and the development of risk maps to lead to more innovative and impactful projects. Such participatory action will bridge the gaps in knowledge at the individual, community, and national level, all of which will move Anguilla towards climate resilience. Next slide, please. Our proposal seeks to adopt a multi-sector approach, which includes public sector, private sector, and community-based groups to ensure that climate change adaptation is recognized as a national priority. Through strategic management of the trust fund, we envision that it will support projects with localized community benefits, as well as projects that have national value that can be replicated on a regional and international scale. The constitution of the trust fund will detail the criteria by which projects will be assessed to ensure that projects are recognized for their real-time on-the-ground benefits. Building awareness about what the trust fund is intended for and how vulnerable communities can benefit will also promote equitable access. Next, sorry, same slide. Given that Anguilla has an established investor network and considering increasing attention around climate change adaptation and resilience, we forecast that we will receive generous and consistent contributions. We also intend to build the trust fund for at least 2 years before we start investing in any project. We will also ensure that—
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. The portion of funding that's allocated to the administration and management of the fund will be capped at a certain percentage so that we don't go overboard. Our team recognizes that it is a tall order to ask our government to divert funds from an already stretched budget to support this trust fund. We also recognize that the sustainability of the fund requires unmatched collaboration between key stakeholders to implement and enforce existing policies and strategies that have been dormant for years. The process we imagine will be frustrating and labor-intensive, but the motivation to see it through is simple. Our lives on this beautiful yet vulnerable island that we call home depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carencia. Yeah, I think that really rings true, your closing words there. I will open up to the judges if there are any questions for Carencia and Team Adapt to Survive. Enrique?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. Just to know, like, if you see your project being replicated internationally, and how do you see, like, you could adapt it to do so? Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question, please?
If you see your project being replicated internationally for outside of your country, and if you do so, how would you adapt it to have an impact outside?
Okay, so when we spoke about adaptation of projects on the international scale, we meant specifically adaptation projects that the fund would support. So for example, if we decided to implement or invest in a project that dealt with managing coastal erosion through the implementation of beach nourishment mechanisms and hard engineering mechanisms, we imagine that the best practices we learned from that particular project can be replicated in other regions and on the international scale. So in essence, the projects that we are referring to would be the ones that the fund would invest in. If that answers your question.
Thanks very much for that presentation.